coming to get you, Barbara. They're coming for you, Barbara. Look, there comes one of them now.
Welcome to the latest episode of Guy Who Calls Himself a Movie Critic, despite not reviewing a movie for over a year, who occasionally posts podcasts full of excuses of why his show's not weekly anymore. That's right, I'm your host, Christopher Spicer, and this is actually the movie breakdown. And I'm absolutely amazed that despite the fact that I don't even post a show once a month, that when I do post a show, the listener numbers, the download numbers are still really high. And the only thing that I can figure out of why you people still come back to this podcast, despite me constantly breaking my promises and not reviewing movies and not really posting on a consistent basis for many, many years now, is that you were listeners of us from 2013 to 2020 when we did post every single week and there was me and Scott reviewing movies. Because I can't figure out how a new listener in the last 5 years would have stuck around unless you really are looking for your 3 times a year dose of a guy saying, I'm going to get back to weekly and I am going to review movies, I promise. Like, if that's your thing, amazing. But yes, I'm finally back after not posting anything since June. And we are now coming at the end of August. And actually a lot has happened here in the Christopher Spicer house, in the Spicer house. I'm not sure why I decided to put my first name on top of my entire family. There's one Christopher here, and then there's, my 2 children and my wonderful wife and our dog and our cat. But anyways, Everett has graduated from elementary school. That's happened since the last time that we have recorded a podcast, which is crazy. In a week, my little boy is going to strut himself as a teenager and go to high school, which is absolutely insane for me. I got a little bit of a proud moment as a father. Obviously, my son keeps on making me so proud, as does Danica. As I think on the last podcast, I mentioned how we did Music Man, and he had that great opportunity to play Winthrop, which is a major role in that musical. And thank you for all those who did come see that show. That was definitely my favorite show I've put on, and I think it was one of Everett's as well. But Everett had a great graduation, and he ended up walking away with 4 awards. One for math, one for sort of the highest mark in his class, French, and he also got one for theater. So, well, arts actually, the whole thing, like performing arts. But so that was great, him being acknowledged in those areas, and then he taking that sort of love for French, he actually did a French immersion in Quebec for 3 weeks. So that was the longest that I, as a father, did not have my son around. So I don't know what was a bigger deal for him or me, but definitely an opportunity for him to be like really independent. He said he really learned to sort of that independence, having to actually wake up in the morning without someone waking you up and making sure you make it to the classes and having to do laundry. And we even had him allow him to sort of have a budget where he had to learn what to spend things on and be good with his money, which I don't know how well he passed that. But yeah, so 3 weeks of that. And then after that, they went off to a camp, and me and Emily went to a cottage. And right after that, then we went to Stratford and saw Dirty Rotten Scoundrels and Annie, which were absolutely incredible. It's kind of like a family vacation. I talked about that a little bit in my site, Beyond the Balcony. So if you guys don't normally check out that site, you can see some photos there and a little bit of talking about those experiences. And this summer was definitely sort of a good test of me, as I'm not, the idea, as I've mentioned before in this podcast, the diagnosis of realizing that I am autistic and ADHD explains a lot of sort of the challenges throughout my life. And one of those is the fact that, I like to travel and I like to meet people and I like to do exciting things, but I also really get burnt out and my brain really analyzes every single experience and goes through every single conversation. And so this summer, it was wonderful time with my family. Want to focus on the good things, but it was definitely exhausting and definitely had its emotional tolls on me, and I'm still trying to figure out how to balance all that. And that, of course, is why we're back here, where the site is still not posting movie reviews. It's still not the pop culture hub I hoped for, and this podcast is still not even close to weekly. And I just want to thank all my listeners that are still patient with me and have continued to support me despite this year where I haven't necessarily been consistent in delivering the stuff you want. I do apologize for that, but I am really grateful for how many people have reached out and how many people, even though, you're not in my brain and you don't know what I'm going through, I have appreciated the people who have checked up on my mental health, but I've also sort of empathized with the idea of I think I mentioned on the last podcast, I've definitely written about it, that idea of mourning the diagnosis of being neurodivergent. Not that I'm mourning the fact that I am neurodivergent, but that for 47 years, I did not know that way. 47 years, I was battling to try to be normal. For 47 years, I thought I was broken and there was something wrong with me. And there's just sort of that idea of, if we lived in a world where in the 1980s you could be both autistic and ADHD, which you could have been, but they didn't diagnose you for that. It was one or the other. Who knows what would have happened when my parents got me tested way back then when they would, your son has both. That's why he's not necessarily showing signs of just ADHD or autism. It's why he's kind of this mishmash of them. It's because he has both, and his brain is wired for sort of wanting change but also wanting routine. And who knows what have happened if it wasn't until 2013 where they started diagnosing people for both. Who knows what have happened in my life. And it's just been a challenge in that way of really trying to figure out who I am now and where I want to go forward, and just sort of figuring out what are truly my interests, what are things that are truly me, and what were things that I did that were for the sake of seeking normal or trying to just be sort of that regular person. And so I do apologize that this podcast has definitely been in dreadful shape, but there's a lot of other things that I've sort of been promising to create that I haven't quite got there yet. There's also just the fact of, I've talked about mental health so much in the last few years, and that was a part of a reason why my career derailed for a bit, that I am trying to get back on track with my freelance career and building clients again, and trying to really be in a spot where my career can be something that supports my family. And so that's been a big challenge too, of just sort of getting that confidence back, getting that routine back, making those connections again. And so I'm not going to say 100% that we're back to weekly, but I am going to say that I am, while I've been gone from podcasting for the last few months, I have been putting strategies in place and routines in place and a schedule in place with the goal that sort of there's certain things I am going to post on the site every single day. And one of them is Mondays, this podcast, the movie breakdown. Now, I've already spoiled that I'm not going to be reviewing a movie today, mainly because I have not even seen any 2025 movies, but that was going to come. My goal is still to have a best of the year show at the end of the year. It's still to list the best movies of the year, which just means I've got a few months to really catch up and really track down the movies that I think could be sort of the hidden gems I can champion, but also the movies that I think have been sort of those important sort of blockbusters that I want to say are they worth seeing, and sort of what's it speaking to our culture at this time, the society, all the things that I sort of enjoy doing. But I do want to just quickly look at sort of the interesting kind of state of the movie industry right now, and sort of a lot of times of people sort of getting shocked with what ends up being the big box office hits and then one ends up flopping a bit. And one that I do want to talk about is there is a few pundits, a few sort of podcasters or people who analyze film that they keep on pushing back for the last few years about this whole idea of the comic book fatigue or superhero fatigue. And then they always point to the fact, well, there's still all these superhero movies that are making money. And I think what they are sort of forgetting is when there's been other sort of big trends, like when there was musicals and there was westerns and there was the star-driven picture and sort of the raunchy comedies, like these things that at one time were big box office hits, and then eventually you basically say that people have got fatigue on them. They no longer are draws. I think what gets forgotten is it's not like when westerns stopped being the top grossing movies that no one ever saw any westerns anymore. I mean, Clint Eastwood made the High Plains Drifters, and he made Picture the Pale Rider. Like, he made movies after westerns were still major draws, or Unforgiven, which is the 90s, when we're way past when westerns are considered a draw, and they still made money, or they won an Academy Award, and they still got people's attention. And after the Star Wars craze was done, you still had sci-fi movies that came out in the 90s that still did well in the box office, like Men in Black and things like that. And so I think there is a bit of sort of being disingenuous when some of these people push back, saying that sort of the comic book fatigue is a myth, when they point to say, because look at these hits. Because I think what it really means is there was a period for several years where the Marvel movies are basically the highest grossing movie of the year. Everyone's in on anything Marvel could bring something out. During that period where Guardians of the Galaxy, the comic book that no one ever heard of, ended up being a massive box office hit, was the period where Marvel could kind of do no wrong. And during that period, any studio could sort of put out a comic book movie that's probably going to be decent. Because not decent necessarily in quality, but it's going to do pretty well in the box office, because people were sort of, that was sort of the hot thing, and everyone sort of wanted to gobble up those different type of movies. And when we talk about comic book fatigue now, it's not like Batman or Superman or Iron Man or sort of Spider-Man, the ones that are sort of these iconic superheroes, the most well-known comic books. It's not like they're going to have no one come see them whatsoever. What it is saying, though, is maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago, that would have been the highest grossing movie of the year if you have a big name comic book star, and that most of the comic book movies are going to be in the top 20 and win their weekend. And now it's sort of saying that people are going to come if they are interested in that character or the story's appealing, but they have sort of moved past just being ready to gobble up anything that has to do with sort of a comic book like movie. And I feel that really started around the time of, Top Gun Maverick. I think a lot of the reasons why Top Gun Maverick was such a big, massive hit was people were starving for something a little bit different than kind of, that Marvel humor, that Marvel palette, that Marvel kind of style of picture. They were wanting something different, and Top Gun Maverick had that earnestness, had the different type of characters, just a different form of kind of pacing and storytelling that appealed to people. I think it's the same reason why the Avatar sequel did so well. It was still giving you that blockbuster appeal, but it was not like the comic book style. And then Barbenheimer last year, we're talking like 2 years now. Same thing, I would say, in that regards, is that the Barbenheimer thing was a total sign of certain people being tired of the comic book movie, and this was something different. This was a big talking point. This is sort of where the culture moved to. This is what is now in the zeitgeist. And so I feel this was the sign that appetites were sort of changing and what considered sort of big discussions were changing. And that leads me to the point of like right now, if you're looking at the highest grossing movies domestically, Superman sits at number 3. And obviously you say, well, this just contradicts everything you said. And I'm going to counter in that Superman is the most well-known superhero probably in the world. He's the most iconic. This was going to be the kickoff to the new DC Cinematic Universe. And so I'm saying if anyone was going to buy in that the Cinematic Universe was a big thing and this reinvention of DC is the most important thing, this movie's success was going to really show how much people buy that. And this was a heavily hyped movie. It had James Gunn, who's a director that's got massive followers, massive fans. He gave you the Guardians of the Galaxy series. And I would definitely say, yeah, it did well in the box office. There's no reason that Warner Brothers should be disappointed. But I'm pretty sure when this movie was initially conceived and this idea of a new sort of reworked cinematic universe was put together by David Zaslav and his team, that their eyes were on Superman being like the highest grossing movie of the year, it being just a big, massive hit. And it was a hit, but I think this is a sign of the future that Superman did what it did in this spot, in that just being a comic book movie is not a guaranteed hit anymore, and that Warner Brothers may want to reanalyze how much they're going to go all in on this cinematic universe. Like if they're expecting to put out 2 or 3 DC movies a year, setting up to some big kind of Justice League movie or whatever, they may want to rework that. They may want to think it over. They may want to put in some discussions in place, because this, to me, I think this being the first and this being behind the hype and this being such a big star, that a lot of the other ones are likely going to come to diminishing returns. I don't think you're looking at, a lot of these follow-up movies are going to do even better than Superman. You're looking at Superman probably being one of the best. And so this is sort of showing the sign. But I mean, I also could be completely wrong, but I do think that's a sign, and an even bigger sign of my idea that the fact that like comic book movies aren't guaranteed hits. Number 7, Fantastic Four, another movie that people were waiting for quite a while and were excited about and had a lot of hype behind it. It gets the 7th spot, so MCU does not even get to say they had the highest grossing movie of the year this year. Captain America comes in at 8. Now, in some ways, you could say that Captain America should be happy with that because it came out with some pretty poor reviews. And then Thunderbolts, which, I mean, it's sort of the sidekick movie. All the sidekicks put in a team at number 10. But again, I would say, like, you look at Guardians of the Galaxy. You go a few years ago, a Thunderbolts movie would probably make it in the top 5 just because it is MCU, and that's just not enough anymore. But what I am definitely saying, though, is that obviously the next few years we're still going to see comic book movies that draw people. There's going to be comic book movies they're going to do well in the box office. I'm pretty confident, like, when the Spider-Verse movie comes out and the next Spider-Man movie, I'm sure those will be massive hits and maybe very close to one of the highest grossing movies of the year. And the next Batman movie, I'm sure, will be really successful. But I do think that we can be pretty confident in the idea that there is a form of comic book fatigue and that the comic book genre is not at its height anymore, and there is a little less interested. But have we moved to like video game movies now being the next big hit? That's the interesting thing, because Super Mario Brothers was one of the biggest hits of its year a few years ago, and then you had the Sonic movies that were also really big hits, all 3 of them, and now Five Nights at Freddy's, I think it was about 2 years ago, was another surprise hit, like, for its budget and what it was. It showed that people were really into Five Nights at Freddy's. And now we have the Minecraft movie, which I would have never, at the beginning of January, predicted being the highest grossing domestic movie of the year by the time that we've reached the end of the summer. It would have never been something that I would have predicted or guessed. Yet here we are. The Minecraft movie was just has been a massive hit. It's been a phenomenon, and I mean, one of the reasons why I just never thought it would be a hit is I get it's one of the most popular video games of all time, and both my kids love it, and there's so many people that have played it, but there's a lot of people that have played a Rubik's Cube. There's a lot of people that have played a Frisbee. There's a lot of people that enjoy a yo-yo. There's a lot of things, like SimCity is a game that everyone during my generation played, but not everything necessarily translates into an interesting movie. And to me, I didn't think Minecraft necessarily set itself up for a movie, or one of those cases where, again, like, I like pie, but that doesn't mean I want to see a movie of it. And I thought Minecraft didn't necessarily, you love the game, that doesn't necessarily mean people want to see a movie of it. But they somehow were able to get the right marketing, the right connection. I think Jack Black has kind of been synonymous with he's in video game movies. So I think casting him was very smart. And it was also a movie that is just filled with memes and filled with a lot of sort of pop culture things, and it had a lot of things that people liked. Kind of became a very discussion-worthy movie, and it somehow was able to sort of, that Barbenheimer effect. It's the closest thing to Barbenheimer this year, where it's going to be one of those movies where you need to see it because everyone is talking about it, and it's definitely one of those shocks. I also think, though, this is one of those cases of it can't necessarily be repeated. I don't think Warner Brothers or any other studio should necessarily look up Minecraft and say, all right, we need to now start turning other building block games into movies, or looking at whatever worked for Minecraft that is necessarily going to work again. Like, I don't even know if Minecraft 2 is necessarily going to be a big hit. And I would see this as kind of one of those once-in-a-lifetime things, or something that's going to come to diminishing return, but I could be completely wrong on that, because I also would have never predicted what ended up being the second highest grossing movie domestically this year, and that's Lilo and Stitch. And I know Lilo and Stitch is big. I mean, the original came out over a decade and a half before my daughter was born, and she loves Lilo and Stitch, and all her kids love Lilo and Stitch. And one of her birthdays, she got a bunch of Stitch stuff. So I understand that Lilo and Stitch, Stitch especially, is very popular among a generation that didn't even see the movie originally. So I get it, something that people were excited about, and so when we made that movie, it definitely became sort of a big event for probably younger kids. And then another thing is millennials, they would have been growing up with Lilo and Stitch. That would have been their childhood movie. And millennials are the ones now that have the younger kids. And it's definitely showing that, as much as like a few years ago, movies set in the 80s and the 90s, movies set in that period, but also movies set on pop culture during that period, translated to big box office hits. And they still kind of do. Now it seems like things from the 2000s sort of have that nostalgia button, that nostalgia strength, because of millennials sort of growing up during that period. And so Lilo and Stitch is, I think, had that big nostalgia feel, and it's one of the live action movies that ended up being a big hit compared to some like Snow White that I think ended up being a bit of a disappointment for Disney. Lilo and Stitch, I think, ended up being a big surprise, and so that was a huge thing. And so I think you're going to see a lot of studios looking at sort of pop culture things that were popular in the 2000s now, and trying to find ways to turn that into a movie. If that means that they're going to revisit something like the Disney Atlantis movie, do a live action version of that, or a live action version of Treasure Planet, I'm kind of interested. I'd be interested to see what they would do with those movies as live action. So I'm not totally opposed to this if they have an interesting kind of story idea and they don't just necessarily go beat for beat, which I don't think they would for those kind of two movies, because those movies weren't necessarily big hits. But I think if you make an interesting movie, they could be surprised in its success. Another big standout that's, I think, important to me is the fifth highest grossing movie of the year right now, Sinners. Partly because I love Ryan Coogler, so I love the fact that Ryan Coogler has essentially, since after he did his independent movie, since he's sort of been making sort of big budget mainstream movies like Creed and Black Panther, he keeps on delivering hits. And Sinners at number 5 is a big, massive hit. That's a great thing for Ryan Coogler's career, a great thing for Michael B. Jordan's career, but it's also a great thing for people who are fans of horror, but also people who are fans of original movie ideas. Because another thing we keep on hearing is the original movie is dead. The original movie idea is dead. We are past the period where the only things that studios are going to greenlight or have any faith in is something that is based off something popular from like 20 years ago, or is a sequel, or is based off a video game. And here is Sinners, a completely original idea that ended up being a cultural phenomenon and ended up being just a big, massive hit. And I think it does show that people are hungry for original ideas. And what's important here is obviously one is making something that creates a conversation, gets word of mouth going, is something that is getting shared and discussed in social media so that people then want to see it. And so you got a movie that has legs, where it's not just the opening weekend, because an original movie is never going to be the highest grossing thing in the opening weekend because people don't know really what it is yet. So it's something that needs to build momentum and have that time. And the other thing, I think a lot of the weight on the marketing is make it really obvious what this movie is about, so it can attract people. And so there is that importance of, as much like, there is the idea that, you know, there is no truly original idea. And so when you do that marketing, you have to make it clear of like, what's this type of movie? What's the thing that is going to draw the person? What are they getting attached to here? Because people aren't just going to go see something because it's original. They're going because they think it's going to be good. And so there has to be a story beat or a star or a theme or something that people can connect to and understand and be interested in seeing it. Or the idea of like going back to the 80s, something like a Romancing the Stone. Romancing the Stone is not an Indiana Jones knockoff, but if you look at the poster and if you look at the marketing, it reminded people of Indiana Jones. And that's what made Romancing the Stone a big hit. But then when they came to see it, they realized, oh, this is not just another version of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Romancing the Stone is something different. But now they're there, and it delivered, and it was an entertaining movie, and it was funny. And I think that is sort of some of the things that marketing has kind of lost. They just sort of resort now to just the IP and the brand name. Well, I think if you can show people like this is something you understand, that you'll be connected to. In Sinners, it was obviously, you got Michael B. Jordan, you got Ryan Coogler. On top of that, it's a vampire movie. People understand vampires. It looks scary. It had a very distinct style and visual sense, and I think those things all sort of drew people in. And I think also the thing about Sinners is that even though it's a horror movie, there were themes, there were drama, there was action, and so I think some of those horror movies that have a little bit of other stuff in it, like even Get Out, you had some humor and comedy that worked in there. A Quiet Place, again, has a bit of sort of that action feel and the thriller feel. And so I think of those horror movies that feel a little bit more like a sumptuous meal, to have a little bit of the blending of the genres, are going to draw people in. We also sort of are in a spot right now where it seems like horror movies, and at one point I would have said animated movies, are the only ones that are allowed to have original ideas. Unfortunately, Elio from Pixar didn't do as well as Pixar hoped, so we might even be in a spot where animated movies are going to start just being sequels or based off things that people recognize now, but we'll see where that goes in the future. But Sinners is going to kind of reaffirm, I think, in the mind of some studios, the horror movies are the only ones that you have the original idea. And I do think that is the wrong takeaway, because I do think it helped that Sinners was a horror movie. And like I said, horror movies seem to be the one that people will kind of take a chance on, even if they don't know even if it's an original idea, but they're going to take a chance on a horror movie because at least they sort of know what they're expecting. Like, oh, well, this is one that I'm going to be scared at. I'm going to jump. I'm coming here for sort of the thrill. Like, you still sort of understand what's being delivered here. And so they're willing to take a chance on a horror movie opposed to maybe some action movies or dramas or some of these other genres where if I don't recognize it, I'm not going to bother going out to see it. But I think more of the takeaway is sort of what I said earlier, is when it's an original idea, people at least have to have some idea of what to expect. And when they have that and it's appealing, especially when it starts causing sort of a conversation and talking points, you are going to bring people out. And I think that really is capable in any genre. And I really do, really do desperately hope that there's some studios that once in a while will take a chance on a picture that isn't necessarily horror when it comes to sort of that original idea, because I think Sinners is more than just horror movies are hits. It's that original ideas when it's crafted in a way that appeals to people can still do really well. Mission Impossible is top 10, The Final Reckoning, and I absolutely love the Mission Impossible series. I'm a huge fan of it. It's probably one of my all-time favorite action series. I definitely get a lot more fun out of the Mission Impossible series than something like Fast and Furious, which I've just never connected to. But I think there's a good chance that maybe with this sort of not even going to probably be in the top 10 by the end of the year, that we're probably going to be saying sort of goodbye to that series, or it's going to be kind of reworked a bit in some ways. Just speaking of sort of horror, I mean, Weapons just came out a few weeks ago and it's already number 13. I'm very happy to see that Weapons does well. That came from the same director who gave us Barbarian, and I really liked that, and I really liked just sort of the fact that he seems to be someone who is not afraid to sort of very much tell a different kind of story, go in a different direction with things, not have to do sort of straightforward horror. Barbarian is, you saw the marketing material, and then when you saw it, it was very different than what it was hinting at, and you sort of have those with the Barbarian of two people who sort of that double book Airbnb, and so you really think the horror and sort of the tension is going to be based off the fact of, oh, one of them's not supposed to be there, maybe we shouldn't trust them, and then it went in a completely different direction. And so that's what I like about that movie. It took chances, and Weapons seems to be a picture that is kind of following that same idea, and so he's continuing to develop some really interesting movies, and so I'm really happy that the kind of follow-up picture ended up being a big hit. Final Destination Bloodlines is another one which I definitely need to see and discuss, but it is definitely the conversation around it is it's more than just your typical blood and guts horror picture. It did want to talk about sort of ancestral lines and the sins of our ancestors type thing, and that legacy that can haunt people. And so that's interesting stuff. 28 Days Later apparently was another movie that wasn't afraid to be a little bit more complex. It's interesting that Freakier Friday, that kind of follows up with the millennial idea. The original the Freaky Friday remake. There was a Freaky Friday in the 70s, and then Freaky Friday in the 2000s, I think around the same time as Lilo and Stitch. This is a sequel to that one, and so it, again, sort of reaffirms that those type of movies are connecting with that demographic. And then I think I also need to mention something like The King of Kings, obviously a Christian movie. There's always sort of this discussion of this idea that Christian culture is sort of being ignored, or just like we're at the end times, and there's none of this kind of clean pictures. And I think that continues to sort of be a myth, and that very clearly there is studios that will very happily target pictures towards Christian groups, and they continue to be hits. And I think it's often there'll be people that probably don't see any movies except for those Christian movies because they never think there's necessarily something for them. And it's a very smart marketing technique, and The King of Kings is obviously another example of that. One of them days, 24th highest grossing movie domestically, is one of the few kind of pure comedy pictures that went to theaters this year. Comedies is definitely something that seems to be it just shows up on streamers now. Very few pure comedy movies come just to the theaters anymore. One of them days became the beginning of the year. And so I think in some ways Sony should take 24th highest grossing movie, 50 million domestically. I think that needs to be seen sort of as a win. And if you can keep those budgets low, then maybe, you put a few comedy movies in theaters throughout the year. It helps change things up. I mean, we're in such a spot where there's so few comic book movies. I was even sort of interested in The Naked Gun, despite the fact that, like, one of my least favorite genres is sort of like that farce or that parody movie. Even though I love the original Naked Gun, but all those movies that Naked Gun success kind of spawned in the 90s make my eyes roll so much that sometimes I'm scared that they're going to fall out of my sockets. But this Naked Gun, seeing that Liam Neeson was kind of having to be in the role of the comedy person, so taking the Leslie Nielsen role was kind of interesting to me. Pamela Anderson being in a big screen picture again was interesting, and apparently this is really good. One of the few kind of parody movies in modern times that's worth watching, and that made in the top 30, which again, it's not big massive hit, but it's not sort of like declaring the return of the comedy movie. But I think we need diversity, and so it's nice that at least it made some type of money. And maybe, again, studios will at least sprinkle a few of those type of pictures here and there. And so that's kind of a quick little discussion on the box office. And I will most definitely try to track some of these movies down, talk about them on the podcast, write about them on Beyond the Balcony, and see them before the end of the year so I can rank them. I definitely at least got to sort of see the top grossing movies for sure, but I definitely really want to see Sinners. That is definite on my list. I should also mention F1 movie, because this was a big shock. I don't think anyone was really expecting it to do as well as it did. It just has missed the top 10, especially since racing movies don't necessarily always do well. But I think, again, the success of the F1 movie shows that there is a demographic that's, especially a demographic that's sort of kind of my age and older, that feels they're not being served in a theater anymore, but they grew up in movie theater, so they're still willing to go if there's something interesting. And I think F1 is a sign where they sort of delivered that, and so people responded to it. And so, yeah, there's looking through sort of some of these movies I haven't seen yet. Mickey 17's another one I really want to see with Robert Pattinson, from the person who gave us stuff like Parasite and Snowpiercer and a bunch of movies that I've always been a big fan of. And I still haven't seen this one, but really interested to see what he does with Robert Pattinson and his many, many clones. This is the 17th clone. I've loved every Paddington movie, and so Paddington in Peru is one I'll have to track down. Grew up with the Karate Kid, so obviously I have a soft spot for that. Ballerinas and the John Wick world. The Monkey, which is based off a Stephen King short story. That's another one that I'll want to track down. Hard Eyes, sort of a romance versus slasher picture I'm kind of interested in seeing. There was also another one, I think it was called The Drop, that is kind of a thriller, or sort of Drop. And sort of a thriller type picture that I'm interested in see, where a woman sort of is going on a blind date, and then she gets a very disturbing message on her phone and she has to solve that. I'm always really big in sort of those type of movies, and so that's one I'm looking at. Black Bag, Steven Soderbergh, a thriller. So lots of stuff that I'll hopefully track down. And now some movies that are still to come that I'm interested in seeing in the coming months. I have no idea if The Long Walk will be any good. This is Stephen King, one of the shorter Stephen King novels. It was originally done when he, under his pseudonym of Richard Bachman, but I think it's a really interesting idea, The Long Walk. I feel like it's something that maybe inspired something like Battle Royale or definitely Hunger Games. Young teenagers basically forced to kind of take that long walk, and if they can't do it anymore, they get shot. It's in a dystopian period of life, and I think it has potential being something really interesting. And so I sort of want to see how this unfolds on the big screen. I'm not necessarily interested in a sequel to Spinal Tap. I mean, I love the original Spinal Tap, but we're talking a movie that came out like 40 years ago, and I don't think we are necessarily demanding a follow-up. But I feel like the Spinal Tap sequel is going to either be one of the biggest disasters and disappointments of the year, or it's going to just be this majestic follow-up. Kind of like sort of our Top Gun Maverick, where I thought that was going to be such a disastrous idea, and then it ended up being a big hit, and I ended up liking it more than the original. And I feel Spinal Tap 2 sort of has that potential. It could be the either or. We're either looking at something that is going to be just a big magical surprise, or just a big massive mistake that I think that it could possibly be. We've got a horror picture that is being produced by Jordan Peele that I'm very interested in and know very little about. It's called Him, and it's essentially about a guy who makes some risky decisions in order to sort of get farther in his football career. And I don't know a lot about it, and I really don't want to know more than that. I like the idea that I'm sort of unaware. Marlon Wayans is in this one, and I'm just fascinated to see sort of where this goes, him, and is it like a monkey paw situation? Does this person kind of sell his soul for success? And I think it could be one of the more interesting horror movies at the kind of end of the year. Another one that obviously is on my radar has to be Paul Thomas Anderson's latest picture, One Battle After Another. Paul Thomas Anderson is one of those guys where maybe not every single movie he makes is one of my favorites, but he is a filmmaker where you have to pay attention every time he makes something. But this has got a pretty loaded cast. Leonardo DiCaprio in the lead role. Regina Hall is in this one, Sean Penn, and so Benicio del Toro. Very interested to see what this kind of war picture, drama picture is going to be about. But anytime we've got a new Paul Thomas Anderson movie, it's worth checking out. And so we'll see what. And Leonardo DiCaprio is one of those actors where I feel like just his name alone is enough to warrant check out that movie. He's pretty picky on what he sort of attaches his name to. Another picture that I was not interested in at all at the beginning of the year, but now I am a little bit more interested in checking out, is The Smashing Machine. This is clearly Dwayne Johnson's grab at getting an Oscar, a Best Actor Oscar, or at least a nomination. He's largely sort of just considered sort of a box office star. I think he's pretty underrated as an actor, though I do admit that he largely kind of plays himself, but he has great charisma. And I think this is his attempt to finally get maybe some acknowledgement as an actor for his craft. He is playing Mark Kerr here, a real-life mixed martial artist. It's about his career, at least looking at sort of the peak of his career. We've definitely got some makeup here and trying to transform Dwayne Johnson to make him look more like Mark Kerr. That, from what I've seen the trailers, that's obviously well done. Benny Sadfi is an absolutely great director. He's teaming up with his brother. He's given us hits like Good Time and Uncut Gems. So I really like his filmography and what he's presented. And so I have a lot of faith because of who the director is. And the trailer surprised me. It was more appealing than I initially thought. I'm going to mention Kiss of a Spider Woman, even though this is potentially a picture that could have been a total disaster. It looks like it's a musical, and it's basically about sort of some guys that I believe it's during a period where there's political unrest in Argentina, and they are, I think at this point, yeah, so they're sort of political prisoners. They're in jail. They see this movie called Kiss of a Spider Woman. They become obsessed with it. And then we might get a little bit of sort of the Purple Rosa Cairo situation, where I think the Kiss of Spider Woman star then kind of comes in their life. This is played by Jennifer Lopez. This is a musical. It's definitely trying to sort of fit that old school musical feeling. I'm in musical theater. I always have a soft spot for musicals. Anytime there's a musical, I'm sort of at least ready to give it a chance. I like Jennifer Lopez. Diego Luna plays one of the main stars here. And it's apparently got a great reception at the festivals it went to. And so this could be a really great movie. I am interested to see how it turns out. Roofman is a movie that I'm interested in seeing as well. It is based off a true story about a guy who essentially breaks into a McDonald's to basically rob the McDonald's, and he does it through kind of a hole in a roof and trying to steal the money. And then after he sort of escapes from prison, he lives out in like a Toys R Us apparently for 6 months. So this is a true story that clearly has sort of that quirkiness that people like for those odd character movies, those character driven weird real life tales as a movie. I always, when those are done well, I'm really interested. Derek Cianfrance, who has made he made Place Beyond the Pines and Blue Valentine, two movies that I really loved. So he's a director where I've really enjoyed his stuff. So I'm interested to see what he'll do with this. Knowing his previous pictures, that probably means it's going to be more dramatic than the plot makes you think. It's probably going to be less a Coen Brothers thing and maybe a bit grittier than you would think, just based off things he's done before. Channing Tatum's in this one, Kirsten Dunst, Ben Mendelsohn, Lakeith Stanfield, Juno Temple, Peter Dinklage. So you've got some really heavyweight, talented actors in this one. And so I definitely think this is going to be one that's worth checking out. Based off the director, this may be one that's kind of gunning for some Oscar attention. We've also got After the Hunt from Luca Guadagnino, who recently did Challengers last year. And he was also in the picture that I can't think of the top of my head that was the Timothy Chalamet kind of breakout picture. And so this is After the Hunt. Julian Roberts is in the starring role here, and you don't see her as much. Andy Garfield, Shirley Savini. So again, some talented people, talented director. It's about a professor who has to grapple with sort of hiding a secret after one of her colleagues is accused of something. And so, I mean, this sounds like a plot that has been on the big screen a lot, but I think with this talent involved and this director and sort of just his way of how he tells stories, and usually very much sort of having that that sensuality and that sexualization that is usually absent in mainstream pictures now, he brings that to a lot of his movies. And so I'm interested to see how that's going to work in sort of on a big scale. It's a MGM Studio release picture, which means it may go directly to Amazon. Hopefully, it goes to theaters. And I'm a big fan of the original Predator, and Prey was such a delightful surprise. I will stand by the fact that Prey should have got a theatrical release. We are now finally getting a Predator movie with a theatrical release again. Predator Badlands. Very different than Prey. I think this one is set more in the future, and we've got sort of a Predator that is, I think, going to be more in the protagonist role. Ellie Fanning is going to be in this one. I'm interested to see how this turns out. It looks good from what I've seen from the trailers. Another picture, Keeper. It's a Evil Cabin movie. We've had a lot of those, but the main reason why I mention it here, while skipping a whole bunch of other movies that are coming out in the last few months, is because it's Osgood Perkins, who gave us Long Legs and also did Monkey earlier in the year. I like his style. I like what he has shown so far, and so I'm interested to see what his take on sort of that style of picture will be. And The Running Man, I mentioned in the last podcast. It is another one that is based off a Stephen King novel when he was under the Richard Bachman pseudonym. And this one, obviously, some people would see as a remake of the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie based off what I've seen through the trailer. I think this is going to try to be a more faithful adaptation of the book. A big reason, even if you're not interested in Running Man or another dystopian picture, something set in a dystopian future, and another kind of long walk thing where this very violent kind of TV show or entertainment that people see, even if none of that is interesting to you. Edgar Wright, who gave you Baby Driver, gave you Shaun of the Dead, gave us lots of Hot Fuzz, some really interesting pictures. He is directing this one, and so I think that alone is worth giving this one a shot and checking it out. Glenn Powell takes the lead role here, but you've also got Josh Brolin in this one, Michael Cera, William H. Macy. So a very interesting picture here. I did see a bit of I did see a trailer, and it just got me more excited for this one. And I love the first Zootopia, so sign me up for the sequel. I think it will be fantastic. I think there's a case that they're trying to solve. It should be a really fun movie. And to wrap things up, I know I keep on saying I want original movies, but I have to admit I am interested in Avatar Fire and Ash, partly because I really liked the last Avatar movie. I thought it was just such a perfect cinematic experience. Maybe it was almost 3 hours long, but it was just such an amazing visual story. Even if the story itself was amazing, the special effects and the pacing and the immersion of the world, I just think James Cameron really nails that. And I have no reason to doubt that he won't be able to do that with the Avatar Fire and Ash as well. And so that is, and like I said, there's a lot of other movies that are out that I'm interested to, but I just decided that, this is one person talking, so maybe you don't want me to talk forever. And if you do, well, I disappoint to let you down, because I'm not going to talk forever. I'm going to wrap this show up now. And thank you so much for listening to me. And to say I am going to try my best to turn this back into a weekly show. It's going to be solo for a little bit, with maybe some special guest appearances from my kids for movies where I am allowed to watch those with them, and they can offer some of their thoughts as well. And once we get back in this weekly routine and get the audience back and really get the movie breakdown moving, I will start looking for maybe sort of a rotation of guest hosts, and with the hope of one day Scott returning, and if not, maybe one day we'll find that guest host that I have that great chemistry with, like I did with Scott, and they will be the new host of the movie breakdown. But the plan is definitely for the show to continue going. And like I said, thank you so much for listening to us this week. This obviously has always been brought to you by Spreaker Prime, and it's been on the Beyond the Balcony website since the very beginning. And if you have any thoughts or questions, you can contact us at themoviebreakdown@gmail.com. There's also, since it's just me now, you can also just contact me, the writer, me, and the podcaster at christopher.d.spicer@gmail.com. And there is the Twitter at Movie Breakdown 1, and we also have a Facebook page at The Movie Breakdown. And another way you can really help us out is subscribe and rate on Spreaker, Spotify, CastBox, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're mostly everywhere. And another way you can really help us out is choosing to listen on the Spreaker app. That would be great. So please share us on social media. If there's an episode you really love, spread the love. Let others know about it. And another big way you can help me out is head over to my site, Beyond the Balcony. As I confess, there isn't really movie reviews this year, but I have talked a lot about my neurodivergence and my mental health journey, and so you can check that stuff out. I've discussed about my experience on Music Man and theater, so if that stuff interests you, and just a lot of kind of personal anecdotes thrown in there. So if that stuff is interesting, you can see it at beyondbalcony.com. And you get your little lamp, you rub that and make a wish, and your wish being that I will return next week finally with a movie review. And if that's the case, 8 months waiting, maybe we'll finally discuss Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul. I mean, I gotta see the latest Iron Man movie, even if it's eight months old, because I love me some Wallace and Gromit. And so maybe we'll review that next week, and maybe we'll review something new in the theater. What could that be? Well, come back next week to find out. Thank you so much for listening this week. I am Christopher Spicer, and have a great week at the movies.